He didn't move. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. The first time we meet Dr. Hannibal Lecter, he's not restrained, not speaking, not even threatening. He's simply standing there utterly still, centered in the frame, his eyes locked onto something just beyond the screen. And that's where the discomfort begins. Because The Silence of the Lambs doesn't try to frighten you with spectacle. It uses something much older, much deeper: stillness, observation, silence. This is not just a thriller, it's a psychological autopsy, not of murder, but of fear itself. And what's left behind after you've examined it closely is not shock, but something far more difficult to shake: the realization that you've been watched the entire time. The film won 5 Academy Awards. It redefined what a psychological horror could be. But it also did something more subtle. It rewired how we see its characters, especially Lecter. He isn't just a villain, he's a presence, a shape that continues to exist in your memory even after the movie ends. And what most people don't realize is that the most haunting parts of the film weren't even in the script. They were buried in the lighting, hidden in the sound design, hinted at in the performances, whispered between the edits, or worse, cut entirely. From a voice that was scientifically engineered to bypass your defenses, to real-life serial killers whose behaviors bled into the writing, to visual tricks designed to make Lecter feel like he's still watching you even after the credits roll, these aren't just facts. They're the things that made The Silence of the Lambs unforgettable, and most of them you never even noticed. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about The Silence of the Lambs. Fact 1. The shadow that dominated the film was only on screen for 16 minutes. It's easy to assume that Hannibal Lecter haunted the majority of the film, but here's the uncomfortable truth. He was barely there. Anthony Hopkins appears on screen for just over 16 minutes in a film that runs nearly 2 hours. That's less time than a commercial break in a binge-watch session. And yet, his character occupies more space in the audience's memory than any other in the story. Why? Because every second he's present is crafted for maximum psychological weight. Director Jonathan Demme used a rarely applied technique in mainstream film, having Lecter look directly into the lens, creating a reverse voyeurism. The viewer doesn't observe Lecter, Lecter observes the viewer. His gaze is neither aggressive nor passive. It's surgical. Hopkins also made a conscious decision not to blink during key dialogue. The effect is subtle but devastating. We don't register it at first, but our primal instincts do. The eyes don't close. The expression never breaks. He becomes a still predator, coiled in human form. What's more unsettling is what happens when he's not on screen. The film keeps cutting back to silence. Empty corridors, cold walls. And in your mind, Lecter is still watching from somewhere, just off camera. If someone can terrify you with silence and stillness, how much screen time do they really need? Fact 2. The audition that shook everyone and was locked away forever. Before he was cast, Ted Levine didn't just read for the part of Buffalo Bill. He delivered something far more disturbing. Instead of showing up for a traditional screen test, Levine recorded a private video at home. No crew, no soundtrack, just a man, a mirror, and a handheld camera. And in it, he improvised a performance so raw, so unfiltered, that it caused immediate discomfort in the room. He recreated what would later become the film's most infamous moment, the tuck scene, without music, without makeup, without rehearsal. Just stillness, and a voice that vibrated with something too honest to be acting. The tape was passed through limited hands. Some casting executives refused to finish watching it. One called it something you don't want to have in your head when you're trying to sleep. Even after the film's release, the audition was never shown publicly, not on DVD extras, not in retrospectives. It became part of the film's off-screen mythology, a performance too convincing to be revisited. So what does it mean when an actor's audition feels like a confession? Fact 3. Buffalo Bill was a patchwork made from real horror. There's a reason Buffalo Bill feels real. Because he island, but not as a single person. He's a fusion, a composite stitched together from multiple true crime nightmares, carefully researched and reassembled by author Thomas Harris and screenwriter Ted Talley. Start with Ed Gein, the man who robbed graves and created furniture, masks, and a bodysuit from human skin. Then add Ted Bundy, who lured victims by pretending to be injured, exploiting empathy as a weapon. Then insert Gary Heidnik, who kept women trapped in a pit, tortured them, and believed he was building a family. Each of them contributed a piece of the monster, but together, they became Buffalo Bill, a creature too layered, too precise to be invented. His violence isn't random, it's constructed, methodical, ritualistic, and it was the FBI's idea to keep it that way. Yes, the Bureau cooperated with the film, offering real behavioral profiles to ensure that Bill didn't feel like fantasy. They wanted him to feel plausible, which means they wanted him to feel close. Maybe Buffalo Bill's greatest horror isn't what he did, but how much of him already existed before the script was written. Fact 4. The light didn't just reveal him, it deformed him. Hannibal Lecter is introduced with almost supernatural poise, but it isn't just his performance that makes him feel inhuman. It's the light. Cinematographer Tak Fujimoto chose to violate one of the unspoken rules of movie lighting. He lit Lecter from below. Instead of flattering shadows and natural highlights, this upward lighting cast unnatural gleams on the bottom of Lecter's face, turning his cheekbones into ridges and creating deep-set shadows where his humanity should have been. It's a technique often reserved for monsters, demons, or campfire ghost stories because it distorts the bone structure. It flips the laws of light, so the brain registers it as wrong before the eyes even do. But the effect was subtle. There were no jump scares, no glowing eyes, just something quietly incorrect, as if Lecter's face was borrowed from somewhere else, some other creature mimicking a man. And during his early scenes with Clarice, you may notice, he doesn't step forward, the light does. In a film built around silence, sometimes the loudest scream is a well-placed shadow. Fact 5. The moth on the poster carries a secret you were never meant to notice. You've seen the poster, a pale face, a moth covering the mouth, a skull-like symbol on the insect's back. But that skull? It's not drawn, it's not CGI, it's a photograph. And what it shows might disturb you more than the film itself. It's a piece of surrealist art by Salvador Dali, titled Involuptas Mors, and it features 7 nude women posed to resemble a human skull. This image was embedded, almost subliminally, into the marketing of The Silence of the Lambs. Why? Because the entire film plays with layers of transformation, flesh becoming symbol, beauty becoming horror, identity becoming costume. The Death's head hawk moth is already rich in symbolism, often linked to omens and transformation in folklore. But placing Dali's living sculpture on its back turns the image into a cipher, a visual message encoded with the film's deeper themes: metamorphosis, body, obsession, death. You thought it was just a poster, but like Lecter, it hides far more than it shows. Fact 6. The screams weren't fictional, and they never really stop. The film's title is metaphorical, until it isn't. The Silence of the Lambs refers to Clarice Starling's childhood trauma, her memory of helpless lambs being slaughtered. But for Jodie Foster, the screams weren't confined to the script. During the intense back-and-forth scenes with Anthony Hopkins, Foster recalled experiencing what she described as a phantom auditory hallucination, a sensation where she could hear lambs screaming even though no sound was present. It wasn't a psychotic break, it was the side effect of deep role immersion, a phenomenon where the actor's nervous system responds to fictional stress as if it were real. Foster avoided Hopkins off-set, not because he was threatening, but because she couldn't separate herself from Clarice while the camera wasn't rolling. And when the shoot ended, she didn't feel relief. She felt echoes as if something had been opened that couldn't be shut again. When a role invades your nervous system, where do you go to escape it? Fact 7. The glass cell wasn't for containment, it was for confrontation. In the original novel, Hannibal Lecter sits behind metal bars, locked in a traditional prison cell, a beast behind a cage. But on screen, director Jonathan Demme made a different and deeply calculated choice. He placed Lecter inside a glass enclosure. Why? Because bars suggest distance, safety, framing. Glass suggests something else entirely: vulnerability. Not for him, for you. When Clarice approaches, there are no shadows to hide behind, no visual cues of separation. Lecter's face is lit, centered, and watching her and you without obstruction. The fourth wall doesn't break, it dissolves. Cinematographer Tak Fujimoto used this setup to trap not just Clarice, but the audience. Your reflection becomes part of the frame, your sense of safety becomes a lie. The more you watch him, the more you feel like you've entered the cell, not as a guard, not as a visitor, but as prey. Sometimes the scariest monsters aren't the ones you can't reach. They're the ones that can see through you completely. Fact 8. The distance between Hopkins and Foster wasn't just acting, it was survival. The tension between Clarice Starling and Hannibal Lecter is palpable. What few people realize is that much of it wasn't performance, it was instinct. Jodie Foster has admitted in interviews that during production, she avoided Anthony Hopkins almost entirely. She didn't chat with him between takes. She didn't sit near him at lunch. Not because he was unkind, but because he made her skin crawl. Not Anthony Hopkins the man. Anthony Hopkins, the presence. Once he stepped into Lecter's persona, something shifted in the room. He was soft-spoken, polite, but there was a stillness, a surgical silence that disturbed even veteran crew members. Hopkins never needed to raise his voice. He just needed to remain still and let your imagination do the rest. Foster didn't break character to protect the role. She did it to protect herself. What does it say about a performance when even your co-star avoids eye contact? Fact 9. The FBI didn't just approve the script, they quietly used it. It may sound like conspiracy, but it's true. The Silence of the Lambs was quietly used as a recruitment tool by the FBI. Director Jonathan Demme and screenwriter Ted Talley were granted full access to the FBI Academy at Quantico, including real agents, case files, and behavioral profiling materials. But there was a condition. The Bureau wanted Clarice Starling to be portrayed as competent, ethical, and inspiring. Why? Because the FBI was struggling to recruit female agents, and they saw in this film an opportunity to change perception. The result? After the film's release, applications from women surged. Many cited Starling's character as the reason they applied. A fictional agent had achieved what real-world messaging hadn't. She made the Bureau feel accessible, worth fighting for. The irony is sharp. A film about manipulation, obsession, and predation ended up humanizing law enforcement. So what else in this film was designed not just to entertain, but to influence? Fact 10. The script kept changing because the film refused to stay still. Most films are built on locked scripts. The Silence of the Lambs wasn't one of them. Screenwriter Ted Talley didn't just deliver a final draft, he delivered daily evolutions. Entire scenes were rewritten just hours before they were shot. Dialogue was cut, restructured, simplified. Not because it was broken, but because the film kept shifting its emotional gravity. One day, it tilted clinical. The next, spiritual. Some lines were removed not for pacing, but because they made the horror too legible. And then came the most legendary, unscripted moment. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. That line was written. What wasn't written was the sinister, reptilian slurp that followed it. Anthony Hopkins added it spontaneously, mid-take. No one had heard it before. The air shifted. Foster froze. Demme didn't call cut, because something had entered the scene and it wasn't in the script. Sometimes, the most unsettling moments are the ones no one planned. They just arrived. Fact 11. Clarice Starling's greatest weapon was silence. She never yells. She never threatens. She doesn't even posture. And yet Clarice Starling controls nearly every room she enters. Why? Because she understands something most people never learn. Silence speaks louder than dominance. Jodie Foster prepared for the role by training with real FBI cadets. She observed how female agents were taught to engage suspects not with force, but with stillness and pause. By letting others speak first, they gave themselves space to listen and power to disrupt. Clarice doesn't challenge Lecter with bravado. She gives him the one thing he isn't used to, quiet. And in that quiet, he begins to unfold. Even the rhythm of her breathing, measured, deliberate, becomes a form of resistance. It says, "You don't intimidate me, not because I'm stronger, but because I'm not moving." In a story built on the threat of violence, she chose presence over performance. And that's what made her unshakable. Fact 12. The real Hannibal Lecter was a surgeon and a killer. The most terrifying part of The Silence of the Lambs isn't what's on screen. It's the fact that Lecter wasn't fully fictional. In the 1,960 seconds, author Thomas Harris interviewed a convicted murderer in a Mexican prison. The man, known under the pseudonym Dr. Salazar, was soft-spoken, articulate, and brilliant. A respected surgeon, he had also dismembered his lover. Harris was stunned by the contradiction. How could someone so calm be capable of such cruelty? That tension, the fusion of civility and monstrosity, became the DNA of Hannibal Lecter. Years later, investigators revealed Salazar's true identity, Dr. Alfredo Balli Trevino, a physician who killed a man, drained his blood, and attempted to dispose of the body in medical fashion. He served time. He was released. He disappeared. And like Lecter, he never once raised his voice. Maybe Lecter didn't come from imagination. Maybe he came from a conversation we never should have had. Fact 13. The score didn't warn you, it lulled you into vulnerability. Most horror scores tell you when to be afraid. The Silence of the Lambs did the opposite. Composer Howard Shore didn't build the soundtrack on shrieks or stabs. He built it on sustained dread, long, low-frequency tones that never resolve, like anxiety that doesn't have a name yet. In the infamous escape scene when Lecter tears through two guards, you might expect chaos. But what you hear is something closer to grief. The music doesn't explode, it mourns. The strings swell not in terror, but in tragic grandeur. as if we're watching something sacred being desecrated. This is no accident. Shore later revealed that the score was designed to create emotional ambiguity. Lecter isn't given villain music, he's given funeral music. It asks the audience, are you repulsed or transfixed? And because the soundtrack doesn't give you instructions, your mind fills in the blanks. When the music stops guiding you, you start wondering if you've been sympathizing with the monster all along. Fact 14. Buffalo Bill's skin suit wasn't fiction, it was autobiography. No single moment in The Silence of the Lambs disturbed audiences more than the revelation of Buffalo Bill's suit. It's grotesque, dehumanizing, impossible to forget, and horrifyingly real. The inspiration came directly from the crimes of Ed Gein, a man whose Wisconsin home was discovered in 1957 to contain bowls made from skulls, chairs upholstered in human flesh, and yes, a full suit made of skin. But here's the detail that rarely gets discussed. Gein didn't create the suit out of sadism. He believed that by wearing the skin, he could bring his deceased mother closer to him. It was grief. Twisted, warped, but grief nonetheless. Buffalo Bill inherits this logic but mutates it into transformation. He doesn't want to bring someone back. He wants to become someone else. The suit becomes a symbol of identity obliteration, not just horror but erasure. And that's why it lingers. Because the fear isn't just in what he's doing, it's in the question, what part of himself is he trying to escape? Sometimes, the body isn't the disguise. The Mind Island. Fact 15. The deleted scene that was too real for fiction. You never saw it, but it exists. There was a scene shot during production that depicted young Clarice witnessing the slaughter of lambs, not in metaphor, not as narration, but as raw footage, silent, slow, and unflinching. It was shot in documentary style. No score, no filters, just handheld footage of animals being dragged, restrained, and silenced. Real sounds, real fear. Not staged, not dramatized, just the camera, watching. When the scene was tested, it changed the tone of the film. Not into horror, but into something worse. Guilt. Audiences weren't afraid. They were ashamed. And that emotion stuck. Director Jonathan Demme made the decision himself. Cut it. Lock it. Don't release it, not even as a bonus feature. To this day, the footage has never been seen again. Some truths don't belong in thrillers. They belong in nightmares we're not ready to admit are real. Fact 16. The most famous line was never spoken, but you remember it anyway. Good evening, Clarice. Say those words aloud, and almost everyone will picture the same thing. Hannibal Lecter, eyes forward, voice cold, greeting Clarice Starling with ritualistic menace. Only one problem, he never says it. Not in that form, not in that tone, not even once. In the actual film, Lecter greets Clarice with "Good morning," and later with "Hello, Clarice." The now iconic line? It was invented somewhere between parody and memory, possibly in a promotional trailer, possibly in a skit, but never in the film. And yet, your brain insists it was real. This is known as the Mandela effect, a cognitive glitch where masses of people misremember the same thing. It's not stupidity, it's neurological efficiency. Your mind fills gaps with what feels inevitable. And nothing felt more inevitable than Lecter whispering those words. But here's the unsettling part. The false quote has now eclipsed the real ones in cultural permanence, which means Lecter didn't just invade the script. He rewrote your memory. So if your mind misremembers a line this clearly, what else has it quietly rewritten? Fact 17. The mirror wasn't for vanity, it was for ritual. Buffalo Bill's mirror scene is often reduced to a shock moment, but that reading misses something deeper. This wasn't humiliation, it was transformation. Director Jonathan Demme gave Ted Levine minimal direction. Instead, he asked him to approach the mirror not as himself, not as the character, but as someone imagining who they desperately wish to become. What we see is the result. Bill's body sways slowly to music. His hands pose, his voice changes. He tucks himself, not for provocation, but for possibility to get closer to an imagined identity that his own biology denies him. The mirror reflects aspiration through delusion. It's not about gender, it's about escape. It's about the kind of psychological fracture where the body becomes a prison, and the only way out is through unmaking. And when he looks into that glass, he's not looking for approval. He's asking a question: can I become what I've imagined? Even if I have to destroy myself to do it? Maybe that scene wasn't about transformation. Maybe it was about mourning the self that never got to exist. Fact 18. The silence in this film was built to collapse you. Listen closely. Then, listen to what's missing. Throughout the Silence of the Lambs, sound designers deployed a technique called negative sound design, not by adding noise, but by systematically stripping it away. Ambient sounds, ventilation hums, distant footsteps, traffic were erased. What's left is a vacuum that tricks the brain into alertness. It's not true silence. It's silence with intent. When Clarice walks alone, the world becomes too quiet. When Lecter speaks, there's no padding, just voice, just breath, just you, hearing every syllable as if it's inside your skull. The absence of sound doesn't relax you. It closes in on you. By engineering silence as pressure, the film turns passive, listening into active dread. Your ears become hypersensitive. Your body prepares for a threat that isn't coming, because the real threat already spoke. Silence doesn't just fill the spaces between dialogue. In this film, it becomes the loudest voice in the room. Fact 19. The mask was never meant to hide him. It was meant to expose something worse. The muzzle. The brown, bone-like restraint. The image that haunted film posters and memory alike. But that mask wasn't just a prop. It was a message. Designed by the production team after studying actual psychiatric restraints, animal control devices, and even ritual death masks, Lecter's face covering was created with surgical intention to conceal the mouth but amplify the eye. You weren't supposed to focus on his expression. You were supposed to be trapped in his gaze. The mask wasn't meant to silence Lecter. It was meant to make his stillness feel more dangerous. His ability to speak is restricted, but his presence becomes even more pronounced. His face, half human and half effigy, suggests not safety, but unreleased violence. Notaman muzled, a predator poised. And the detail that disturbs most? The mask was molded to fit Anthony Hopkins' face perfectly. Every curve, every bone, every line. What you saw wasn't costume. It was containment, barely. The question was never whether the mask could hold him. It was whether it was the only thing standing between him and us. Fact 20. The final line was a whispered rewrite of the entire film. I'm having an old friend for dinner. It's said casually, almost warmly, as if Lecter isn't preparing for murder, but making polite conversation. But that line, quiet, venomous, unforgettable, was never part of the original ending. The script originally called for Lecter to vanish silently into the crowd. No words, just absence. The kind of ambiguity thrillers often love to leave you with, but something about that felt incomplete, too naive, too safe. So Hopkins offered a suggestion, a single, final line that would reframe everything. And he delivered it with such chilling composure that the crew paused, as if they'd just witnessed something unscripted but inevitable. What makes the line even more disturbing is its layered tone. It's not a threat, it's not even a promise, it's reclamation. A reminder that Lecter doesn't just escape justice, he re-enters the world with appetite. He didn't just survive the film, he stepped out of it and left the door open behind him. Bonus fact. The voice wasn't performed, it was constructed to enter your mind. Some voices stay with you because of what they say. Hannibal Lecter's voice stays because of how it was built. Not spoken, not performed, engineered. Anthony Hopkins knew from the beginning, this character wouldn't work if he sounded theatrical. So instead of reaching for intensity, he reached for control. He studied hypnotists. He watched documentaries on reptiles, how cobras hold still before they strike. He listened to the voices of cult leaders, men who used calmness as a weapon. And then, with surgical precision, he lowered the tempo of his speech, flattened his inflection, spoke in patterns designed to bypass conscious defense. The result? A voice that doesn't rise or fall. It doesn't emote. It doesn't plead. It simply arrives already inside you. Sound editors later revealed that Lecter's vocal track triggered involuntary tension in post-production mixers. Some said it felt like the lines weren't coming through the speakers. They were coming from behind them. And Hopkins himself once described Lecter's voice in 6 words, like a scalpel sliding into silk. So now, the question isn't what he said. It's whether you ever truly stopped hearing it. You've now seen what lies beneath the surface. Not just the facts they left out, but the choices they buried, the voices they sculpted, the silences they sharpened into blades. The Silence of the Lambs wasn't built to terrify you in the moment. It was built to haunt you in hindsight, and maybe that's why it worked. Because long after the credits rolled, you kept thinking about Lecter's voice, Clarice's eyes, the glass, the mask, the possibility that some part of this wasn't fiction at all. But now that you've seen what the film tried to hide, we want to know, which fact disturbed you the most? And what detail changed how you see this story forever? More importantly, what other film should we dismantle next? Leave your answer in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't, because this is just one story, and every film is hiding something.